Welcome back to Talk of the Town on 99.7, 1450 WHTC and WHTC.com.
And we welcome you back to Talk of the Town for this Friday, May 14th. I'm Gary Stevens. It is the second Friday of the month, which means in this time slot, it's a segment we call Ask the Attorney, with one of our two local attorneys that are gracious enough to give to us their time on a bi-monthly basis, discuss matters involving probate, business law, and other civil matters. Before we bring in the segment, I do want to remind all of our listeners that although we'll be talking about topics, we advise all of you, if you have a specific legal question or a legal concern, please consult with your attorney before making any decisions. We can point you in a direction, but before you take steps, we ask that you please consult with your attorney before you move forward. And also, I'd like to mention in this particular segment, being an odd month in terms of the number, that the guest that will be with us is also the mayor of the city of Holland. But we will not, or try not to, talk about matters involving the city of Holland. Instead, we'll focus on what we like to call his day job. He is the founder of Central Park Law here in Holland. His name is Nathan Bocks. He joins us via the Zoom connection. Nathan, good morning. Welcome back to WHTC.
Good morning, Gary. Good to see you again.
Thank you very much for joining us. And if you have a legal question for attorney Nathan Bocks, he'll be happy to answer it at 616-395-1450, 616-395-1450. Parameters, we do set them. We mentioned about some of this, I call them disclaimers, but basically some of the things that we need to mention. But Nathan is involved with probate, business law, but is not a criminal lawyer. So if you have a criminal lawyer question, maybe not the best person to ask is Nathan Bocks. But if you have a question about wills, and of course, wherever there's a will, there has to be a testament. No, that's a bad joke. But anyway, if you have a question about wills or dealing with business law or where one would stand, he's a good person to ask. It's 616-395-1450, 616-395-1450. Nathan, we brought this subject up with you and with your colleague, Ken Bazicki of the Law Office of Kenneth A. Bazicki on this particular segment over the last 15 months. And that is the concerns people have about their disposition of their property and their assets when our mortality becomes a little bit more aware of it. We're more aware of our mortality, and certainly with COVID-19, that has been the case. Obviously, I would think that business has improved a little bit in terms of people maybe consulting you and others about getting their affairs in order if something untoward happens to them. Am I assuming too much, Nathan, or not?
No, you're not at all. We had a pause in the legal profession, just like everybody else did last spring. My office was closed for about 10 weeks during March, April, and May last year. And then when we opened back up again in June, we had done some work with folks online and through video conference. And while that's all right for doing initial consultations, those kinds of things, it's still really very difficult to sign estate planning documents virtually. It can be done now, but there's kind of a real convoluted process of doing that. And estate planning documents still require what we refer to as a wet ink signature. So you can't sign those documents electronically. I think the state may be moving in that direction. But once things opened up again in June last year, and we were able to start meeting with clients and people were out and about feeling a little safer going out and doing things, there was this incredible flood of business. And thank goodness, most of that wave were people who were doing planning. Yes, we've had an increase in the number of estate administrations that we've done. I often describe my practice when we're dealing with estate planning as I do both pre and post. So I do the planning piece and I do the resolution piece with that as well. but people have either realized, hey, this is an issue that maybe I ought to get something done with, or often the precipitating event for folks is the death of a family member or a friend, that they'll go, oh my goodness, I need to get my own affairs in order in this regard. And then I think there are two other components to that in terms of the increased business we've been doing this past year. One is people have been home and had some opportunity and some time that they didn't have otherwise. They had some time open up in their schedules. And then also, believe it or not, the stimulus payments that went to folks oftentimes were directed toward things like estate planning attorneys, where people say, well, now I've got a few $1,000s that I didn't think that I didn't otherwise have. And while some people were very stressed economically during the pandemic, there were folks who still continued to work full-time, still continued to get their regular paychecks, and then had these stimulus payments come in on top of it. And they started thinking to themselves, well, hey, we would, what can we do? What's a useful thing we can do with that money? And estate planning ended up for a lot of folks to be that thing. So yes, it's been busier this past year. We're getting ourselves caught up. And actually, one of the things that I was working on as we were just getting started is, while we've been doing an increased number of video conferences with clients, I'm actually in the process of updating our website here at Central Park Law so that we can do more of that and make it easier for clients to do things at a distance. Because while we can get out and do things now, there's a higher percentage of people who said, I'd at least like to start that process at home if I can, or through the internet if I can. And the tools are available for that. So we've been doing that for quite a while. And we're increasing that and making it a little easier for clients to be able to do that.
The website, by the way, is centralpark.law.
Yes.
If you want to find out more online about Attorney Nathan Bocks and Central Park Law. Again, our phone number is 616-395-1450, 616-395-1450. How much work would an attorney, and I'll ask you directly, Nathan, but maybe as consultation with some of your colleagues, how much cleanup do you have to do when somebody comes in and says, I went via the DIY route, the legacy of Robert Shapiro, most notably, but others? How much of a mess you got to clean up because people are trying to do it themselves, maybe trying to save $1 or $2, when maybe they might be saving $1 but spending about $5 or $20 because of the mess that they create?
Like with just about everything else in the world, you get what you pay for. And so it is possible. I have clients come in and say, is this document, legal and valid? And what I say with the DIY sites that are out there, I say they are very careful to make sure that what they are doing is technically legal in all states. And so you'll end up with a valid will or a valid trust. But oftentimes it's not necessarily doing, what I found anyway, is it's not necessarily doing what the client thought that it was going to be doing, or they ended up in a situation where they hit a dead end and they said, well, I'm not sure what to do here. And especially in the legal field, there are some things that we do that are that can be a little bit easier to do online, at least getting started that way. There's a real value in having someone sitting across the desk from you or on the other side of the video chat from you who knows you and is able to ask questions that are specific to your life. And I found I'm even able to tell from people's body language or an offhand comment that they might make, that you find out something about their family, about the relationships within their family that you simply cannot find by typing in on a screen. So in our practice, when we're dealing with things online, we typically start the process online where I say, hey, if you can get me name, address, phone number information for people, that'll save us time in the office. And then we can spend that quality time in the office actually talking about your specific situation and your family and your kids and how they relate to one another and who may be the best person for this and ask the follow-up questions that you simply can't do online with those DIY sites.
616-395-1450 if you have a question for Attorney Nathan Bocks of Central Park Law. It is one thing, and I'm going to I'll make this as general, and some might read between the lines of how when I phrase this, but I'm going to keep phrase it as a general thing. It is one thing to set up last arrangements and you have family members you want to have taken care of. What of a situation when you're the last of the line, where there are no more family members around? Talk about the difficulties that poses for people trying to get their affairs in order, knowing that their brothers are gone, their sisters are gone, mom and dad's gone, and they have no kids.
And those things, those situations can be some of the most I hate to use the word difficult, but hard for people to come up with answers. I try to make things as simple as possible on my client's end. I'd say leave the technical stuff to me and the technical jargon to me. And I say, really, there are three basic categories of questions that you need to answer in estate planning. One is who it is that you would like to have take care of financial matters for you if you cannot. Second is who would you like to have make medical care decisions for you if you cannot? And third is where do your things go? After you're gone, who gets your stuff? As simple as that. Now, there are sub questions there as well. But if somebody says, hey, I don't have any family members, there isn't anybody in my life necessarily that I could have take care of financial matters or make medical care decisions. Or I'm not sure where to have things go because I don't have that traditional structure in doing it. And I say in some cases, that's kind of freeing. If you don't have kids, you don't have an obligation or feel an obligation to leave anything to kids. But that opens up then usually for charities. I've had clients where they do it with friends. Getting a professional lined up to take care of the financial matters is typically not a very difficult thing. But in those situations where somebody says, I'm the last of the line, I don't really necessarily have anyone close to me, especially if someone doesn't have a very tight friend group or support structure around them. The hardest question oftentimes is, who will make your medical care decisions for you if you cannot make them on your own? Because while I've said to clients, hey, if you don't have anybody else, our office can handle the financial administration piece, but I'm really not interested in making your medical care decisions for you if I don't have to. So let's see if we can find somebody else. And sometimes even a pastor fills that role and we've had pastors fill the medical care one, and we've also had pastors fill the financial one.
616-395-1450. Good morning. You're on the line with attorney Nathan Bocks.
Good morning, Nathan. You are my attorney, so for the medical part, when I go into the hospital and make choices, do I have to bring your book with so they can copy that?
Good idea to bring and I was referring to the book as every one of my clients, when they get an estate plan done, walks out of here with a 3-ring binder with all of the documents organized in that. And so, yes, behind there's one of the tabs that says medical power of attorney. You'll want to bring that paperwork. The hospital will make a copy of that or scan that into their system, and you can keep the original then back with your own paperwork.
Wonderful. So, okay, that's all I was kind of wondering. So you have a good day, and I appreciate everything you've done for us.
Hey, wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much for the call.
And no, Mom, I did not arrange that call.
No. That's all right. 616-395-1450, 616-395-1450. Let me, as I'm looking to my right, Peg McNichol in the WHTC newsroom has a question for you. Go ahead, Nate.
I have a constitutional question. So we've had some lawmakers who wanted to create some sort of fine system for journalists, and they're talking about a fact checker fine. And as I understand it, that would be a huge violation of the First Amendment. Can you just speak a little bit about First Amendment protections for freedom of speech?
Sure. And it's pretty broad. It's been a while. And Peg, I don't practice in the area of constitutional law, so I'm going back 30 years to my constitutional law training in law school. But the First Amendment's pretty broad. You have the right to say just about whatever you want outside of the kind of the classic example of you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. You can't do something that may cause harm to others. And there are two pieces that go along with that. related to libel and slander. And you can't write something necessarily that would be harmful to someone, or you can't necessarily say something directly that would harm something. So there's that fire in a crowded theater thing that's a general public. You can't do something that would harm the general public that way. But then there are also limits on what you can do in regard to individuals. And Peg, I don't know exactly the circumstance that you're talking about, because I hadn't heard about it before you mentioned it. But in regard to freedom of the press, there's even I think even a kind of a broader protection there as well that we really value in this country: the ability of the free press to be able to investigate, to be able to report. There are those classic movie examples of the courts wanting, or the police wanting the reporter to give up their sources and tell them where they're getting that information. And reporters have been jailed for that, but it's been held pretty consistently throughout that no, you have the ability to be able to do your job in a way that, as long as you are making reasonable efforts to get the truth out there, that you've got some very broad protections there. So I would be very, very surprised if it passed muster with the Supreme Court that reporters would be allowed to be fined for not doing appropriate fact checking. I would think it would actually have to be the flip side of that, where the proof would have to be that the reporter was intentionally trying to put out false information. And I think that the onus would be in that direction, rather than you have to prove that you did the fact checking that you needed to.
Yeah, that's a subset of the law that I do actually know a little bit about. Sullivan versus the New York Times. That's the absence of malice that you've probably heard about way back in the day, that we get refreshed on a regular basis. But it's interesting because about every 3 or 4 years, someone in Lansing decides they want to somehow hamper the job of journalists. And the First Amendment, that freedom of speech, is so important. Todd Courser just lost a lawsuit against the Detroit News because he claimed the coverage they did of his inappropriate activities in Lansing somehow wasn't fair or accurate. The courts showed that indeed it was all accurate. Now he's got to pay all the court costs and a $20,000 fine to the Detroit News.
Yeah, and again, as Gary said at the beginning, I'm not only an attorney, I also now play the role of a public official. And we have, even as a private citizen has a certain expectation that people aren't going to be saying things about them. Public officials, that gets lowered, that expectation gets lowered. And frankly, as public officials, I think there comes along with that this expectation that people are going to say nasty things about you, whether they're true or not. And you kind of have to take it more than you do if you're a private citizen. And so when you mentioned this and the going up, the immediate thought in my mind was somebody in Lansing or somebody in Washington got upset because a reporter said something about them that they didn't like. And so they were going to try to figure out a way to be able to hamper the press from doing that. And as an attorney and somebody who believes very strongly in the First Amendment and the freedom of the press, I go, no, you don't want to go down that road. We want to make sure that the press has the ability to be able to do the investigation and the reporting that they need to do, because there's no greater disinfectant than sunlight. Letting people know actually what's going on, and having reporters have the ability to be able to find the truth and to print the truth and to get that truth out there, I think is one of the greatest tools that we have in this country to be able to keep our government and our government officials honest.
Nathan has been an advisor not only in probate and dealing with end-of-life situations, but also has dealt with business law and advising businesses on some of the practices and some of the things. Let me bring a question right from today's headlines to your bailiwick for a Danny Gallivan turn. The CDC mask mandates being lifted in some situations. How would you advise a business dealing with masks? Should they continue it? Should they follow the CDC guidelines strictly? Should they wait for the state health department to do something? How would you handle that situation?
I'm a small business owner myself, and over the last 12 to 16 hours, I've been thinking about that same thing, that same question of what do I do. The rules I've been following here at my office and that I have been recommending for clients is to follow whatever the guidelines are that are coming out at the state level. I was very happy to hear what came out of the CDC yesterday. I've been wearing masks throughout this entire process. I don't find it overly burdensome, but it hasn't been a whole lot of fun. And boy, it would be awfully nice to be able to go and be out and about and not have to worry about that anymore. And so I thought about that this morning and thought, well, what am I going to do with clients myself? And so I did some looking this morning to see what has the state done. And essentially what I've learned from the state is the state has said, well, we want to look into that and we want to make a decision on it. And I thought, okay, well, hopefully we'll know something before the beginning of next week or early part of next week. But until that time, I know here, and if a client calls me and asks me about it, my recommendation is going to be keep doing what you have been doing until we hear differently from the state, because my understanding of what came down from the CDC was this is what we're saying at the national level, but your state and your county rules can supersede that and trump that. And I think that that's actually a smart idea, because while yes, we would love to have rules as a country as a whole, we know that different states and even different counties within different states have different levels of infection. They have different levels of vaccination. And so hopefully we're all going to move toward that. We can get those masks off as quickly as we can and get back to normal life or regular life. But I'm recommending my clients the same thing that I'm doing here in the office with. I haven't changed anything. I'm still requiring masks. I still have my big plexiglass screen up here to my left. And hopefully those will come down sooner rather than later, but I'm waiting to hear from the county and the state.
The reason why I say and bring that up is because it is, in a tort situation, if somebody files litigation saying, hey, I got infected because I was at your establishment, they'll hit the deep pocket situation. Yeah,
there's a risk of that. There's also that idea of with HIPAA, with health information privacy, there's that question of, do you ask somebody whether they're vaccinated or not? And I've been talking to people about that, and they say, well, if the rule is that you don't have to wear a mask if you've been vaccinated, do you ask somebody if they've been vaccinated? And if you're asking them, what kind of proof are you going to be getting? And the advice I've been giving is, if somebody tells you that they've been vaccinated, then believe them that they've been vaccinated. And matter of fact, I'm not even going to be asking folks if they've been vaccinated or not. I'm just going to assume that if they are not wearing a mask, they've been vaccinated and they're following the rules. I don't ask anybody about their individual health information at all.
He is Nathan Bocks, attorney with Central Park Law. We'll put a link to centralpark.law, which is the website for Central Park Law, when we put the podcast of our conversation with Nathan Bocks on our webpage at WHTC.com in a few moments. Nathan, as always, thank you very much for joining us. Look forward to chatting with you again in a legal sense in the month of July. And we'll have Ken Pizicki next month in this particular segment. Nathan, take care. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Nathan Bocks on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC.